Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we'll be continuing on our retrospective series to see how the factions and races have evolved during the years alongside some DLC, FLC and quality of life changes such as faction reworks. And we're still on the Warhammer 1 races, so yeah, there's still a lot of reworks to cover. We are going to dedicate today to the Greenskins, also known as the Orcs and Goblins, one of the most varied races in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, as many different subcultures form the basis of this faction. Orcs and Goblins of different breeds, cultures, and what have you. On the tabletop, they were one of the most varied possible armies, and you had so much to be able to play with that you really could just feel just about anything. Total War Warhammer so far has tried its best to actually emulate that and be able to allow you to just theme your armies. If you want to go full Savage Orc, you can. If you want to go full Night Goblin, you can too. It's really up to the player. 2 legendary lords were available for the Greenskins as from the release of Warhammer 1, which was very common. Now, these were Gore Ironhide and Azag the Slaughterer, both very well known and famous characters throughout the Warhammer Fantasy universe and through the tabletop too. The Greenskins have been very lucky throughout the history of the Total War Warhammer series, where any character that has been implemented for them has actually been fairly well known and liked by the fan base. We've got 5 legendary lords so far and no complaints whatsoever from the community because all of these characters have had some big lore moments throughout the many years of Warhammer Fantasy. The only real issue that anyone had with these characters was the fact that they both started in Blackcrag, meaning that you couldn't play co-op very early as both of them had the same faction. Not only that, but Blackcrag really is not a lore-friendly start for either of the characters. In fact, both Gore and Azag were known to be further up north. Now, Azag was eventually moved, and Gore is still in Blackcrag, though I imagine that this is because, well, any other location that he would normally start at in a lore-friendly sense is a little bit further east, and those territories have not been added in just yet. It would be nice if he got moved eventually, but it's not really needed, as Blackcrag does offer a pretty good start with loads of enemies to fight at the very beginning. Now, the Greenskins themselves, unlike the majority of the other base game races of Warhammer 1, were very different to all the others. This is because of a bunch of different mechanics that were implemented to make the race more unique. However, those mechanics themselves weren't really liked by the community. These mechanics would focus around the Greenskins as to how they were implemented in lore, where this would be the first proper Horde faction by Warhammer Fantasy standards, not Total War. So here, you would overwhelm your enemies with numbers, as many as possible of various different types, a bunch of screaming angry green fungus things, which would charge at you and try to throw themselves as much as possible. They want to fight, and this is a faction which you wanted to stay in the fight as much as possible. Let's start looking at what people didn't like, which is what demanded the original rework in the future. First, we'll look at the technology tab, and I bet this makes a lot of people angry because, yeah, it was not a great tab. In fact, while the technologies themselves were pretty useful and made your warriors very strong, the fact that there were so many different prerequisites meant that you would spend a lot of time trying to unlock them all. Yeah, it was not great having just anything locked behind that, especially literally 100% of the actual technology tab itself? This was incredibly frustrating, and if you built a certain meta, it meant that you wouldn't really be able to get everything, which means that later down the line, if you wanted specific units, yeah, you needed to boost them up, and that means that you had to build special buildings or certain buildings, and it just became a bit of a slog. This is by far one of the worst technology tabs that we've ever seen throughout the whole Total War Warhammer series, and thankfully it's long gone now. It's been a long time since you've seen this, I imagine, but these were the original war armies. How it worked is you built up your fightiness. With fightiness, you would eventually progress through a bar and be able to summon in a war army, which was a secondary faction closely attached to yours, but you could not control them. The issue is here that the war army would sometimes act by itself, attack random enemies if they were too close, and wouldn't really follow what was intended of them following your force and actually being a reinforcement army. This caused many issues for many players in campaign, and yeah, it was just not good. I'm just going to say it outright. It gets to the point where these horde armies would be much worse for you than it was to actually be a benefit. There are certain times that I've had playthroughs where I was just far enough away from an enemy where I might be retreating as my force might have taken a beating, and thanks to the horde army being in such a position, it brought them closer and I ended up losing an army. Yeah, sod's law, isn't it? Luckily, the Greenskins had a DLC and FLC which allowed them to be able to be used as co-op factions if you wanted to play with a friend and only wanted to play as Greenskins. So let's check out both these lords as they're also fairly popular. Skarsnik, a very popular Night Goblin character, was released during a DLC known as the King and the Warlord. This character radically changed up the Greenskin faction to allow for a different type of playstyle, as I mentioned before, making use of the fact that the Greenskins have many different cultures. Now you would focus very heavily on Night Goblin and Goblin units. The idea was to completely change up your style of play, as obviously by this point Gore and Azag were focused on a all-rounder type of approach. Now Skarsnik being focused on goblins, meaning that they were weaker, meant that you had to focus around multiple armies and bringing as large of a horde as possible, but also focusing around, say for example, a lot of range combat, making heavy use of Doomdiver catapults for example. The fact that you also could not recruit orcs unless you captured Karak 8 Peaks provided for a very different style of campaign, which meant that you either had to beeline straight for it or just focus around gobbos. It was really up to you and it was quite interesting. In fact, in my own personal opinion, it is one of the best campaigns in the game as it really tries to make it difficult for you. Now, of course, Night Goblins are fairly strong and you can get a lot of benefits from it, but the fact that you couldn't recruit orcs, especially for a Greenskin faction, that was fun. You also had to deal with a minor faction known as the Mutinous Gits, which were pretty much hunting you, and that also gave you a sense of urgency to go get rid of them, as player bias was also a thing, but you would have to deal with their armies as you were dealing with Belegar, and since you were so close to the Empire, you'd have to deal with the Empire fairly early on too. Next we have Werzag, a very interesting orc as he's, well, pretty much insane, but one of my favorite in terms of lore. He's a savage orc shaman and his army focuses around savage orcs. In fact, his playstyle in campaign is also centered around savage orcs, being able to reduce the upkeep of his savage orcs quite dramatically. It should have always been faction wide in all honesty because, well, this is the best idea to be able to have actual themed playthroughs like for example Skarsnik, but still, you were able to have a little bit of fun with this and it was different from the other orc style of play. You didn't use armor, you had a decent amount of range, but you had no war machines too if you wanted to play in a thematic sense. These guys don't like technology, and they'll rather fight you with sticks and stones. But now we can move on to Warhammer 2, which in fact is a good thing. While the Greenskins did admittedly get a decent amount of love in Warhammer 1, it wasn't really too great as they needed a complete overhaul to make them actually playable and much more enjoyable, let's just put it that. So Warhammer 2 does that, and a lot of changes came in. As you can see by this point, where we are right now, we have 5 different playable legendary characters. We'll talk about the newest one very soon, but let's start looking towards the changes that happened to the Greenskins. Azag the Slaughterer was moved to the Red Eye Mountains, far in the northern reaches of the Old World, which means that if you wanted to have an original Gore and Azag co-op campaign, you're now able to. He also is now able to have his own unique start, so there's a reason to go with some replayability. I must state here, which in my honest opinion, I honestly believe that this would have been a better start for Gore as, well, it just fits him lore-wise a bit better. It does work for Azag too, don't get me wrong, but it would have been nice to have Gore being able to fight against Clan Moulder very early on into his campaign, as it kind of fits with his lore, but other than that the change is good, so no real complaint there. Just nitpicking, really. The newest Greenskin character is a rather hefty goblin known as Gromm the Paunch, a incredibly requested character which the community had been asking for ever since Warhammer 2 was announced, I believe. This is a massive goblin who does have a lot of lore going back against Eltharion the Grim, with his own special mechanics and being able to start in either the Mortal Empires campaign or the Eye of the Vortex. Not only that, but depending if you were playing certain factions, he'd be in different locations of the map. So if you played as Elfarian, he'd be closer to you. If you played as, say for example, any other race, then he would spawn in a different location. Just because it moved around through different lore, it made it extremely thematic, and we need more diverse types of start positions like this. Hopefully this does happen more often. It's already been done with a few characters, but needs to be done more. Gromm is incredibly popular as his cooking mechanic does kind of break the game sometimes, and it's just pretty cool because it's another different style of play. This is a very specialized type of play, which allows you to buff up your armies and just have a lot of fun, really. He is possibly the most fun Greenskin character at the moment. Black Orc big bosses were also added in. Now, in fact, yes, every DLC has added in some stuff, but these were an FLC, which was so highly requested, it was weird that we got it so late into the lifespan of the Warhammer series. Though it's always nice to see, as, yeah, you know, Gore is a Black Orc, and we still really didn't have proper Black Orc representation, barring just Gore and some Black Orc units. And just a singular unit at that. Keep in mind, as I said, there are a lot of different Greenskin cultures, and we still don't have them all properly implemented into the game. The Greenskin technology tab was drastically changed. As you can see here, it's no longer the, well, frustrating version that it was originally. Yes, there are still a few prerequisites and so on, but it's not the whole thing anymore, and it focuses around a various different amount of things, with administration, boosting up your units, focusing around goblins or orcs. It really depended on how you were playing and how you would go about it. This was an incredible upgrade compared to the original, and actually made the Greenskins a lot more bearable. You'd have also noticed a new resource known as scrap. This was introduced to the Beastmen and is quite cool, to be honest. The fact is, you could gain scrap by a lot of different ways, with missions, battles, technology, war, raiding. It was just a lot of different things to be able to get this resource, and you would use said resource for stuff like technology, as you can see on the said tab, and of course unit upgrades, something that was very popular. Unit upgrades themselves would allow you to use scrap to upgrade your units. Yeah, it's that simple. But the reason why this was so popular is because each of the units had different options, meaning that you could specialize your armies. This was incredibly popular because you could then diversify your style of play, and it once again focused very heavily on Greenskin lore. The call to war mechanic was added in, which is actually really fun. Essentially, as you keep building up your reputation, you would then be able to get some benefits, so just keep fighting. This was a great thing. You'd get some growth, obedience, which is obviously public order, leadership bonuses, and even recruitment cost reductions. However, if your reputation fell worse and worse, you could then get some negatives. But the way to work around that is, well, just keep fighting. Be an orc. Just keep hitting stuff. When your reputation bar is filled, then you can call a war. This would allow you to then pick a target and just go for them. You could pick the target yourself, and how this would work is there would be a numerical system which would be placed on the world map, and you could then go for whichever was the one that you wanted the most. This would be based on their actual faction standing and how they were in the ranking system. You'd get better bonuses if they were higher on the ranking scale. So say for example, going after a faction which is 52 in the ranking would grant you further bonuses than one that was 130. And you would also get bonuses dedicated to what race they were. So if, say for example, they were Skaven, you would get increased growth and casualty replenishment, and yeah, it gave you variety. You'd have 20 turns to complete this, but you also got a lot of extra benefits from this too. As soon as you look to begin your war, you would be able to dedicate it to Gore or Mork. These are the main deities of the Greenskin races. Now here you would be able to get benefits for all your armies. It could be either focused around range or it could be focused around melee, but either way it depends on what your playstyle is. Not only that, but then you would have access to the War Army system, which wasn't like it was in Warhammer 1. It wouldn't spawn another army, but rather attach an army to your current armies. Yeah, I know that sounds weird, but what that basically means is rather than having a 20 stack, you would have a 40 stack with all of your different armies. Keep in mind that this obviously focuses around how many units you have in your main army before your second one can start building up. You will not be able to get a 20 stack on the second army if your main stack is, say, 10 units. But this gave you the true representation of what was always called a green tide. Your armies would get absolutely massive and you could use this constantly. So say you've got 20 turns and one army can go down for the war target itself. But who's to say that your other armies can't go crump the empire? Your Greenskin Lords also have access to another war mechanic known as a war. Yes, this word is used very often throughout the Greenskin vocabulary, and how this works is very similar to that of, say, the Dark Elf Murderous Prowess, but this is focused around the amount of damage that you do. The more damage that you do, the likely chance that you'll be able to trigger this, and as it works, it's a bar, so you just have to fill that up and do as much damage as possible. As far as I'm aware, unless it's changed, the only way to fill up this bar is through melee damage, and you'll be able to trigger your special ability, well, as many times as you are able to do damage throughout your battles. So yeah, the only difference is that yes, it will cost more war within that same battle to be able to trigger it constantly, but you're able to get quite a lot of quite strong buffs, depending on what you're using, for example, as each of the legendary lords have their own unique war, and then obviously the lords have their own wars too. And if you take a shot for every time I said war throughout, well, this 1 minute, you'll probably die. Finally, the Greenskins are able to confederate with other Greenskin factions by beating down the enemy commander. As soon as you defeat the enemy leader for any different Greenskin culture, then you can confederate with them, which is cool, as that means that you could just take your time. There are different ways about playing this. I myself have waited for, say, for example, Grimgor to build up, knowing full well no other faction is really going to deal with him as I've been playing as Werzag, and then when he's built up all the locations, I just beaten him, just walked right past his other forces and just killed him, and that way I was able to confederate him and a bunch of different settlements that were already max leveled. It's absolutely awesome, and it allows you to be a bit more strategic, focus on the humies more and the dwarfs before turning around and dealing with the other greenskins. But that's pretty much everything when it comes to the Greenskins now, and yet we can still look towards the future. While pretty much all their bases have been covered in terms of units and so on, especially as the DLC has been quite good to them, the Greenskins are still able to get a lot more, mostly in the form of Greenskins. Like I said, we're currently still waiting for a lot of units to then fill out all the cultures. Thankfully mods do that, as yeah, we still don't really have a lot of forest goblins, or even basic forest goblins on foot and so on, but there could be more. The fact is that we still are missing a lot of other different things like Black Orc stuff and so on. It would just be really cool if we saw that in the future. Yeah, it's pretty much the same unit over and over again. The only difference is a different bit of armor and a different bit of weaponry. But given that this was pretty much how they played on the tabletop, I'm imagining that a lot of fans of the Greenskins would love that. In terms of legendary characters, there's also a massive pool that they can pull from. I myself would love to see a Forest Goblin unit, as that would be fantastic. A Forest Goblin Legendary Lord would be really cool, and yeah, anything would work. There's loads of different characters. Mostly most are the same, though some of them do have some different playstyle changes when it came from the tabletop, but it's really up to the interpretation of Creative Assembly. Keep that in mind, that the fact is that the Greenskins are in a very, very good place, and they have received a lot of love. They're also a faction which I'd say have received a rework and does not need any further reworks. Unlike the humans, the dwarfs that have already had two, or the vampire counts that desperately need another one, it's just, yeah, the Greenskins are in a very, very good place, and all that's really left is just adding in units and characters, I'd say. But we'd have to wait and see how that works in the future when Warhammer 3 comes out, as that may change, but so far so good. What do you guys think about the Greenskins? Are they one of your favourite factions, or do you think they need a little bit more oomph? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.